Fairview Eye Care, McKinney Economic Development Corporation, and the North Texas Commission. These partnerships are so key to educating our local businesses and business professionals about elections, the candidates running for office, and the issues facing our region. So thank you for your continued support, even in this virtual setup that we have this year. It's always great to see so many familiar Collin County faces, even over our Zoom calls, including our elected officials in attendance this afternoon. Thank you for the work that you do on behalf of the citizens of Collin County. Chambers, we are vital partners in our local communities, and in particular in our business communities. And I don't have to tell those of you in this virtual room how business is driving the economic growth. I'm sorry, just lost my spot. Economic growth and incredible job market that exists in Collin County. You will hear from a few of our Collin County chambers this afternoon, but I do want to go ahead and take a moment to recognize all of the organizations that helped make today possible from across the county. So we have partnering chambers that include Allen Fairview, the Greater Anna Chamber, the Greater Salina Chamber, Frisco, McKinney, Plano, Prosper, and the Wiley Chamber of Commerce. So thank you to all of my our peer chambers across the county, and we're so glad to be here together celebrating our wonderful county. So thank you again to our members, the volunteer leadership and staff from all of our chambers for being a strong voice for business. And now I want to introduce one of our partners here today, Lisa Hermes, president of the McKinney Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, Kelly, and welcome to everybody to this year's Collin County Days. I know it looks a little different this year, and we are, while we're not in Austin, we're very excited to be able to connect with you in a different way, in a different platform, and hear from our elected officials to know about the work they're doing in Austin that impacts our region. Today's program will consist of 2 panel discussions leading into an open Q&A after each panel. To moderate the discussion, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Jason Whiteley, the senior news reporter at WFAA and host of Inside Texas Politics, which is a weekly political television program that is broadcast statewide on 9 television stations every Sunday morning, including WFAA Dallas and Fort Worth. Jason also co-hosts the new Y'all-itics. I practiced that, Jason. I really did. Still butchered it, and I'm from Texas. Y'all-itics political podcast. Jason not only covers politics, but is also the aviation beat, including American Airlines and Southwest Airlines. He has reported extensively along the US-Mexico border, witnessed 5 executions of prison inmates on Texas's death row, and produced live coverage from 10 hurricanes. His peers have honored him with 24 Emmy Awards, 2 Edward R. Murrow Awards, and 2 dozen others. He won the Emmy for Best General Assignment Reporter in 2019, 2018, 2017, 2010, and 2005. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. The screen is all yours.
Lisa, thank you for that. I appreciate the time. And just a quick shout out to you guys for putting this together, because I'm going to have y'all book our guest on Inside Texas Politics. You guys have everybody on the program. I can't believe you got so many people with the session going on, but congratulations to you. I hope the viewers get something out of it here. So let's get right to it. I first want to introduce our first 2 senators. And first up is Senator Angela Paxton. First elected to the Texas State Senate in November of 2018. She represents the fast-growing District 8 in Collin and in Dallas counties. She is, as you probably know, she's a secondary math teacher and school counselor. She's done that for 20 years or so. And the first educator, that's remarkable, the first educator elected to the State Senate in over 20 years. And Senator Paxton describes her job in 3 words: listen, learn, and lead. She leverages her background in technology, her expertise as an educator, experience as a small business owner, and deep roots in Collin County and in North Dallas, really to advocate for constituents and promote policies that elevate educational and economic opportunity and human dignity as well. But I'm sure y'all have seen Angela out and about in the community for a while. She serves there in Austin, where she is joining us from the Capitol as the vice chair of the Senate Property Tax Committee and sits on Senate committees for Business and Commerce, Education, Natural Resources, and Economic Development. And she was also appointed to the Texas Sunset Commission and Senate Redistricting Committee by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. Angela, welcome to the program here this afternoon.
Glad to be here. Good to see you, Jason.
And our next guest from the state Senate, another friend of mine here too. It's State Senator Drew Springer. Drew Springer is a lifelong conservative Christian. He advocates for traditional Texas values, economic development, and to undo burdensome government regulations. Senator Springer supports pro-life legislation. He defends the Second Amendment and consistently ranked among the top conservatives during his tenure over in the Texas House of Representatives. He spent 15 years, I'm learning this about Drew. He spent 15 years working for a Texas rail car company where he was an accountant, a leasing vice president, and president of 3 divisions. He left there to join his father's financial services company where he specialized in agricultural managed futures and did that for 16 years. And now he works in securities. Springer's family is also active at the Sacred Heart Catholic Church, and the senator serves on the finance council there too. And his resume, as if it couldn't get longer, he also has been a volunteer fireman for 15 years. In the Senate, though, he serves as a vice chair of the Senate Water, Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, and sits on the Senate committees for Administration, Higher Education, Local Government, and Nominations. Senator Springer, it's good to see you again.
Hey, good to see you, Jason. Good to be on with everybody.
Let's dive right into this. We're just a few minutes behind here, but 68 days left in the session. It's hard to imagine. We've been through a lot in the first half of the session here, but let's talk about top priorities for legislation and where those stand right now, 68 days in. Senator Paxton, we'll go to you first.
Well, if you don't mind me making a little bit of a digression, we have a citizen legislature in Texas, which means we each individually bring our backgrounds that are really varied and diverse to the work that we do. And I hadn't thought about the fact that Senator Springer is also a volunteer firefighter. And I would say that every day he has the opportunity to put out fires here in the Texas Senate. And then I would also have to say for myself, I work with high school students and middle schoolers, and I have to say every day that was great preparation for politics. So with that, though, I think, the things that are really dominating the priorities here are the things that, and I know I don't want to speak for Senator Springer, but I know we have a lot of common ground on these things. But the things that I get my priorities from my constituents, and my constituents have said to me over and over again, they want to make sure that we have election integrity. They want to make sure that they have economic opportunity. And a lot of that was really impacted in an unexpected way with executive powers during the pandemic. And so there's a lot of legislation around that that will also be happening. Of course, with my background in education, that is a major factor for me. And I'm glad to report that I think there's really good support among the senators to make sure we don't lose ground on what we accomplished in the last session with the legislation that we passed for education. But of course, there's more to do. There are always new things that come into things. When we started the session, no one was thinking ERCOT reform was going to be a priority. And of course, that has become something that it's not only urgent, but it is very, very important. And it's important for us to remember that the things we learned in this winter storm, the most likely way for these things to recur is actually in the summer for us. And so there are things that we can learn from that and make sure that these same types of things don't recur in August, in just the summer version of what happened in February. So I guess that would be kind of an overview for me.
Well, before I get to Senator Springer, you mentioned one thing that I hear businesses talk about all the time over the past year now, and that's reining in executive power, especially when it comes to closing down businesses, requiring only half the tables open at restaurants, et cetera. I hear businesses upset about that all the time. Where do you stand on that, Senator Paxton? And what's the likelihood that would pass? And might be veto proof to the governor's desk?
Well, I will say this, I'm joint authoring with Senator Birdwell a very comprehensive bill that looks at executive powers. And, you know, one of the things that it's easy in a session like this for us to just band-aid things all over the place, for restaurants, for churches, for this, for this, for this. And one of the things I really appreciated about looking at Senator Birdwell's bill, and it's, you know, we're still working on it, but it is that he's done a very, very thoughtful analysis, I think, of really the interplay between emergency powers and disaster powers. They're not the same, but they've gotten very muddied over the years. And so I think that I encourage everyone to watch this bill, because I think it's going to go a long way to sort of differentiate between those two things. You know, disasters, which are things like floods and hurricanes and pandemics, and then emergency powers, which are more along the man-made riots and you know, those kinds of things. So there's been a lot of muddying of the waters, but you know, we have not ever gone through a pandemic before. And so the thing that was very unusual about this, normally the executive powers are used to make critical short-term decisions until we can kind of get things normalized. This has been chronic. We're not used to using these things over long periods of time. And I think a lot of the frustration was when it's a long period of time, we need to bring the legislature back. And so one of the bills that I filed in conjunction with Senator Birdwell's bill is the ability for the legislature to call itself back into session.
Huh. Senator Springer, you and I have talked about this as well too. This is something that you really are behind as well too, and that's kind of reining in executive control in these situations. But Senator Paxton just pointed out, you know, interesting thing. There's a division between emergency powers and between these disaster powers. 68 days left in the session, Senator Springer. What's on the front burner for you now, because the whole session's been upended?
Well, and let me make sure that everybody understands, you know, we're 140 days, we're just past the halfway point. The first 60 days are really sort of the pomp and circumstance where we have usually Collin County days. We recognize everybody in the gallery. We ask everybody to stand up and we do those things. You know, it's the last 80 days when we really start voting on bills and hearing those that we really get ramped up. And we're probably only about a week behind schedule, is what my best guess is from where we are. So we're going to continue to tackle the people's work. You know, look, we come in with a very tough budget. We got very fortunate. The Texas economy has been stronger than Glenn Hager was predicting last summer. And so rather than a $5 billion shortfall, we're just a few $100 million short. And we've got a tough, tight budget. The best thing, though, as Senator Paxton said, we're honoring our commitment that we did for HB3 last session and being able to do that along with the property tax reform bills we did with the 2.5% cap on school rates. Coming in with COVID, COVID has many different things. Obviously, we're talking about the executive powers. I have a bill fairly close to Senator Birdwell's. I'm a co-author with him on that bill as well. You know, I'd like to see a panel come in after 7 days and us call it in after 30 days. But that would be, as Senator Paxton said, it would be for a unique type of order. It would be where it's a pandemic, a long lasting. Look, if we're dealing with a hurricane that's in Beaumont and it's a declared disaster, you know, they're doing all the right things. We don't need to come back in for a special session for those. It's these kind of situations. And especially where you're closing down businesses, changing people's lives. You know, I've been a big advocate for, you know, opening things up, giving more individuals those individual freedoms to figure out what works for them and what works for their business and what works for their communities as we go through that. And that was the disappointing thing. I had people tell me, they said, look, you know, and I had it both in Salina as well as in Montague County. Look, we have our little festival that is wineries. It's out in the countryside. People are social distancing. This is not a bar on 6th Street. We should not be treated like a bar on 6th Street. And that's where Angela and I would be able to come down and advocate for those. You know, the one thing that's going to get kicked back is redistricting. It'll be kicked back till later this fall, till we get the numbers from the federal government. So that takes one of the big things off of our plate. We've got this ERCOT situation that we've got to, get to the bottom line of and make sure we put things in place that continues to have reliable, affordable power for Texas. We've got almost 200 companies that are already committing to come to Texas this year from the East Coast, West Coast, and all over to relocate their corporate headquarters in Texas. And they want to make sure we have those. Economic development's always a big thing. I mean, look, Collin County is one of the big drivers of the economy in the state of Texas and the growth we're seeing there. And we need to make sure that the light fingerprint of Texas regulations allows them to flourish, but giving them the infrastructure, and that's, both broadband as well as roads and water to make sure that they continue to be able to do those. I think Angela did a great job talking about the elections and election integrity and making sure we do those things right. And those are really where we're focused. Obviously we got some of the social issues and deals that are sort of party related that ours is pushing, as well as the Democrats have theirs. They just happen to be a little bit outnumbered. And so I look forward to laying out my Second Amendment proposals that'll have a better chance of expanding than others.
And for our viewers who may not, may hear me say 68 days left, lawmakers and almost everybody, Congress, State House, City Council, they all work great on deadline and seem to push things up to the wire like journalists do a lot too. So that's why Senator Springer and Senator Paxton don't seem concerned at all about the clock. Because they work better on deadline. But one thing the pandemic has proven to so many people, to businesses, especially to families though, is the fact that we need stable broadband access for people all across this state. Senator Paxton, tell us where you are on this issue. What's the likelihood something might get done?
I think it's a very, very high priority. I appreciate you bringing it up. We wouldn't be able to do what we're doing today, would we? Without good broadband access. In fact, everyone on this call has access. We've seen how that affects every single sector of our society, how interconnected we are today. So from the smallest child in school who had access or didn't have access to instruction, if they did or did not have access to a device, or to internet access. We saw how important this was for many of our seniors in the nursing homes, and who, we can also go back and talk a lot about how that was handled, the isolation that was happening there. But for many people, that was their only connection with the outside world. And so I think we live in a time where it has become like electricity. Having broadband access is like having electricity. And, we've had folks from Collin County very, very involved in this issue. Bill Sproul was very involved in this issue, and continues to be, and many of you know him and his authority and expertise in this area. But I think really that's where it is. This is now basic infrastructure for our state. And there are a lot of things that would be shut down but for the opportunity that we've had to connect in this way. And we've got to make sure that it is available, affordable, and accessible to everyone.
And Senator Springer, same question for you. What do you anticipate is going to happen with this issue?
It's already had its first hearing with Senate Bill 5 by Senator Nichols, Senator Perry, who is out of Lubbock, and myself. It's been one of our biggest issues. I came from a House district that had 22 counties and 25,000 square miles. And we've heard the stories of people having to drive to the Dairy Queen or McDonald's to be able to get their homework uploaded. We've heard the school districts who've done just a fantastic job of driving buses around to create hotspots. Those are temporary fixes. We have to come up with long-term solutions. It's the electrification of the 20th century. It's really broadband for the 21st century. And I really support it. We've got to make it happen.
Maybe...
if I might jump in on that, and Senator Springer talked a little bit about, this last half of the session is really when you see all this stuff happening above ground. Any of you guys who have ever built a home know that once they break ground, you can go out there and drive by every day, and it looks like nothing's happening, right? It's all this site work, all this stuff that's happening kind of underneath the surface that has to happen when they start they pour the foundation and they start framing, all of a sudden it looks like it's happening really fast. But there are a lot of things that have to happen on the front end. That's what we do the first 60 days. What you see is really like Senator Springer talked about, you kind of just see the ceremonial stuff, but what is happening is people are filing bills, they are getting all of that stuff done, the committee work kind of starts happening. But we are now in the part where it is all above ground and it's all happening very fast in front of us. But, I think that it really does matter, for example, with redistricting. So redistricting, the census, of course, got very delayed in being accomplished. And then the numbers, when they're going to get back to us and everything. I serve on the redistricting committee. But one of the things that we were able to do because of broadband is we were able to continue having hearings virtually. Now, we can't do those virtual hearings in standing committees in the Senate because our rules are not written that way, but because redistricting is a special type of committee that only happens every 10 years, we had special rules. So we were able to actually have hearings in regions all over the state, and I would say at a much lower cost than what normally the senators normally travel, and we have staff and there's hotels and all this stuff. So we were able to actually keep moving because of broadband, because of the access that we have. And so I think as we look through all of this, what we have to do is, like a lot of things, I mean, you can't put a genie back in a bottle. We want to always measure twice and cut once as we make these decisions. But I think that we have lots of opportunity and lots more access for a lot of people if they have broadband. And that's where we have to get everything on equal ground.
Let's shift to another ever-pressing issue for so many Texans, and seems like every session down there at the Capitol as well too, and that's healthcare. As both of you know, Texas has one of the highest uninsured rates in the country. Tell us how you feel about expanding access to coverage for all Texans, expanding Medicaid like a dozen other Republican states have done too. Is there specific legislation that either of you would get behind? And Senator Springer, we'll start with you.
We're looking for there's several different solutions that have been proposed. And there's a mixture of different ones we can do. There's still free market. One of those is, lowering cost and transparency, making it more affordable. The other one is, there's federally qualified health centers. They're a part of that mix that are both the combination of the urban and rural centers to where they can draw federal funds down in that regards. They're part of that equation. And we've got to be able to look and see where those are going at to be able to come up with that, and it's also one of those that it is tough because when you talk about, the population of Texas, 29, maybe close to 30 million people now. We know we have a large number of undocumented folks here that aren't covered by insurance. If Connecticut border was up against Texas, they probably would have the same problem. And so, but we do want to look for those solutions, and we continue. And I can tell you the Medicaid and some of the expansions are being discussed. We've got to figure out if it's the right fit for Texas.
Senator Paxton, same question for you. Is it the right thing for Texas to expand Medicaid to ensure close to 1 million more Texans?
Well, I think, I would have to concur with what Senator Springer has said. And I think, there are so many things that I would say are on the table that haven't been in the past, and things that we are all looking at seriously. And so, I think with so much of what the legislation that I look at, for example, and I'll bring up a really contentious issue. This is like the Hatfields and the McCoys, and it's the optometrists and the ophthalmologists, okay? And the last time we had major legislation that kind of decided who can do what was like 20 years ago. And it makes sense that we look with each session at where are things now? Because just because something didn't make sense 20 years ago or 10 years ago, with the sorts of innovations that we see in industry, in healthcare, does it make sense to look at something from a fresh perspective? And so I think most of us are open to looking at whatever we need to do. But we also have to remember that our population is not like a lot of other populations of other states in the country. And Senator Springer is exactly right. We've got a tremendous crisis on our border right now. We have thousands of people literally coming across the border, and many of them are children under the age of 18, which opens up a whole host of other issues that we have to deal with, that we have to admit these create other strains on the dollars we have available to us. And those kinds of things affect what we can do when we are trying to address healthcare for the people who are citizens of Texas, education for the people who live in Texas and are citizens of Texas. And so, you know, I some of you may know that the female Republican senators, I'm one of the 6, we all went down Monday to the border to take a look at things because we were very concerned about this situation specifically with these children who are coming across unaccompanied. And, you know, that's probably another story for another day in its own right. But there are a lot of things that we have to prioritize. And when we prioritize here, it pulls away from somewhere else.
Well, speaking of priorities, one of the legislative priorities for all the chambers in Collin County is getting rid of taxpayer-funded lobbyists. I think I know where both of you all stand on this, but I'm curious if you can tell us where you stand on this, and will legislation get passed this time? Senator Springer.
I think it will get passed. I think that the bill that the House will hear tomorrow is a bookend spot. I think it starts at a very far end where, to my understanding, and I quit reading House bills 2 years ago, you know, but it has, you know, it banned local elected officials from even coming to Austin to testify. And that's just absolutely wrong. You know, the 800-pound gorillas and the big ones tends to be, you know, TAC, the Texas Association of Counties, and TML, Texas Municipal League. You know, a bill that will work is one that allows them to do 98% of what they do. Review the bills that come in front of the legislator, write pros, cons, write resolutions that maybe that folks want to take it up and pass it, come on, giving talking points, organizing our elected officials to come down and testify. That is really what we're after. We want to have the real people that affect change be in front of the committees. So when we ask them questions that says, how will this work in Anna? We get a real answer, not talking to a lobbyist that over 20% of their pay comes out of Harris County because just the size and influence they have in TAC and TML. And so that's really what we're trying to address. We've got to find the balance, because the one thing we can't do is shut off the voices of our local elected officials and our citizens back home.
Well, I think I misspoke just a moment ago as well too, but chambers are against this legislation. It's one of their priorities to, you know, to defeat that in opposition to.
Look, and I knew where you were at on that one. It's been clear in talking to many of my chambers and those. And look, we do not want to cut our chambers out from being able to come down and visit with us and talk to us on those issues from there. You know, on their standpoints. And I think we really get back to close to a bill that was probably the last one on the House floor last time, something that's workable.
And Senator Paxton, same question for you.
Well, and I think there are really 2 versions of a bill on this that are filed in the Senate. One of them is to ban the taxpayer-funded lobbying. The other one is more of a bill that is aimed at transparency. And I think, one of the things that we see is when there's a sense of things going way far over here, then you'll get a response that's like this. And what everyone's really after is probably something here in the middle.
Okay.
I think that one of the, I'll be very honest, I get very little constituent feedback from just, regular people that say, I really like taxpayer funded lobbying. It seems that it is a very separate group of people. When I look at who calls my office and supports it and who doesn't support it, it was a lot like property tax reform. The people that were testifying in favor of, property tax reform, individuals were in favor of it. And then we had the municipalities that were opposed to it. And This is a similar type of thing. I think, in my opinion, I care about what elected officials think. I care about what my chambers think. I care about what my school districts think, and what, if there were more communication, I think, between, for example, the citizens having a chance to maybe approve a lobbyist expenditure before it's made, to go down and lobby on a particular issue, I think that we'd be in a very different place. I think that a lot of just individual citizens have been frustrated. I can tell you statewide that whether constituents are Democrats or Republicans, we get a very, very high level of support for for the ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying. So, what I would say is, this is a call. This is to get our attention at the local level to reach out to taxpayers, to the people that the cities and counties represent, and speak to them directly about this. At the end of the day, a mayor, a county judge, county commissioner, a state rep, a senator, none of us represent cities. None of us represent school districts. We represent individual people. We all have the same constituents. And I think, just like when I think about education, my goal is, how does this affect a student? Not the school is there to deliver, but the consumer of this is the family, it's the parents, it's the student. When I look at healthcare, it's about the patient. When we look at taxpayer expenditures, it is about the taxpayer.
And speaking of students, Senator Paxton, we've all seen what our public schools have gone through starting last spring, going through the fall, and then again this spring as well too. Let's talk about education in our final moments here before we open it up to questions from the audience. What specifically out there in public education really piques your interest, that you think will really help districts there in Collin County?
Well, I have some things that are personal things that I care a lot about. I have a daughter that is dyslexic or has dyslexia, and we walked through that in her own education. She got great therapy, great help, and did really well in school. And guess what? Today she's a teacher herself, and she teaches children with dyslexia. And so this is something I care a lot about. I'm carrying quite a bit of legislation related to making sure that we're serving these students well. It's a very large number of students in kind of the special education side of things, but they don't quite get the same level of services I think that they need, and it affects so many students. That's one thing I care a lot about. Another thing that I care a lot about is virtual education. And this is something that we've all seen. If we didn't have anything at all, if we didn't have virtual capabilities, remote capability, we'd be in a much, much worse place than we are now. But I think most of us also would agree that what we see virtually is just not the same quality as when kids are in the classroom. And so one of the things I think is to make sure that, first of all, that we get as many kids back in the classroom in person as we can, as fast as we can. Number two, I want to make sure that our teachers who are being certified to teach are given training in virtual education and how to do it well, using best practices, using things that we've learned during the pandemic, because it does open up tremendous opportunity and doors, and we need to be exploring it. I think one of the reasons we haven't had great resources in this area is because there hasn't really been a market for it before. Now there will be, and I think we'll have really good quality opportunities there. So that's something else I care a lot about. But the other thing, I guess, finally, is just college shouldn't be the gold standard for every child. I think we need to make sure that we're investing in technical and career education as well, so every kid can have a great job.
Senator Springer, public education. Where are you on that?
Yeah,
I'm thrown off here because I'm thinking Senator Paxton, that's a great idea about virtual. I had issues with virtual learning last spring, but Senator Springer, go ahead. I'm sorry, my mind was off there. Where are you on public education? What do districts need?
No, as we said, the good thing was in the budget, we fully funded HB3. But, Collin County's doing some exciting things, and we need to continue those. The community college there has a career and technical center that they're developing. And as I sort of said, one of the main themes for the budget this session from Senator Nelson is, what are you doing to retrain, upskill, get folks ready to go back in the workplace? And that's really our high schools as well as our community college. If they're not going for that 4-year degree, which so many are not, and that's fine, but they have to be given the skill sets that our employers need in the fast-paced world of especially Collin County. And so, making sure those resources are there. We heard bills today in higher ed, and I've got to tell you, the bulk of them addressed not, how can you do a French Lit degree at UNT, my alma mater, but how can we have somebody that's 30 years old, 50 years old, get retrained and back into the workplace making $20 to $30 an hour? How can we have a kid that's 18 come out already with a certification to be able to do HVAC or do, so many other things? And in HVAC, while that takes a lot of skill set, we're talking about some really, really high skill sets that don't require a college degree. And so I think a lot of our emphasis needs to be on there. I know in testing, one of the big issues, and we've waived the accountability aspect for scoring on the STAR test, but I think it is very critical that we test each and every one of these kids to where they are, because we know there's going to be a learning gap after this pandemic year that they went through school. And we need to see how bad it is, what area it's in there. And we've got to come up in the interim with things that, either starting this summer or next school year that are getting kids back on schedule. And especially those K through third graders, if they're not reading level by grade 3, as they say, you learn to read K through 3 and you read to learn, or after that, I probably misquoted that one, but
Hit it. You said it right.
Hey, thanks. But we've got to be able to understand that what we've lost during this year,
right? Because
they're our future. That is the Texas miracle, or all these kids that are in school, and so we've got to get them back up to speed on those and giving them the resources that they need to be able to do that. It will take money, but it also doesn't take just throwing money at the problem either.
Let's pull in some questions from our attendees as well. And one of them is kind of along this topic regarding education that we spoke about earlier. That's broadband. This question says, what is the likelihood of Texas letting municipalities provide broadband access directly? Because currently we rely on the private marketplace, which operates as monopolies, and the service could be subpar at times as well. Where are you on that, on letting cities actually do this broadband access? Senator Paxton?
Well, I know that this, back during the beginning of the pandemic, we think about Collin County as a pretty affluent area, right? We think about, and if you look at school districts that were have been hit historically with such punitive recapture, Robin Hood, right? Plano's the poster child for that. And so you look at a district that the whole world looks at and says, this is a wealthy, affluent district, but that doesn't mean that every campus in Plano ISD is affluent. And I know I was in touch with Sarah Bonser quite a bit, especially early on. And that was one of the big problems. They had campuses where so many kids did not have broadband. They didn't have devices and that sort of thing. And so, it's a huge issue. It affects businesses, it affects families, it affects our schools. And so I would just say, come talk to me. Tell me what you're thinking. I'm listening. That's what I do. You mentioned that's kind of my motto, is to listen, learn, and lead. I think if we're going to lead well, the way we do that is by going backward through that process. We lead because we've been learning, and we learn because we're listening. And so I'm willing to listen. If you have some great ideas, solutions on that, I'm listening.
Senator Springer, the next question here is for you from Jeff Beckley. He says he applauds the effort to keep a light touch of regulation for Texas business. What's your message, though, to businesses who are trying to keep social distancing and masking protocols in place when confronted by customers who are, going after the frontline employees, challenging their right not to wear a mask?
It's their right. They've got customers and employees they're concerned about. And look, I hope I have not led in anything I've said publicly, because I've been trying to be very supportive of individuals' freedoms to do what they want. But that's also that business owner has that same individual freedom in that regards. And if somebody wants to require a mask and you don't want to wear one, then it's your right not to go into that store. It's not your right, to be an arrogant, trying to say something G-rated here, but, and come across wrong. I mean, that's not who we are as Texans. And you need to respect that business's decision. And if you find it that troubling, go find somebody somewhere else. But, I hope that, and I know Angela and I both do, is trying to tell people to be respectful of each other. These are tough times. And you don't always understand the fact that that business owner may be taking care of a mother who's compromised healthcare wise and they're doing the mask and everything because of the love of their mother, not because they want to take your individual freedoms away. And I think you've got to always in the back of your mind be sympathetic of that. And unfortunately, I think sometimes, Twitter and Facebook has built sort of this, army of being able to say whatever you think with no repercussions coming back at you. And they take that sometimes too many times into the storefronts.
We have just a few minutes left here with our two state senators from Collin County. So if you have any questions for them, drop it in the Q&A box there on the bottom of your screen. One other question that has kind of been bounced around too is about state agencies, because during the height of the pandemic, state agencies had to take a 5% budget cut, most of them. At least. Are those going to be maintained or are those going to be restored? Any idea where that's going to land, Senator Paxton?
I think we're about to find out next week when the budget comes out. I think one of the things we have to remember is that, unlike a family, government doesn't generate income, right? I mean, government gets its money from us. And so like a family, however, if something has happened and your revenues, your income is down, you make cuts across the board and you just have to, and you get real serious about what the difference is between a want and a need. And I think that, you try to cut everything back. I think most of us realize that there are, 5% for a lot of people and a lot of agencies even is a rounding error. And if they can go in and do the work, we're trying to let them make the cut, right? So that they can go find it in the place where it's the least painful, instead of us going in and say, you cut it here, you cut it here, you cut it here. We're trying to let the people that are in the middle of it make the cuts that make the most sense for their agencies.
We have another question about the taxpayer-funded lobbying, about chambers being opposed to that legislation. Jeff Beckley is asking, classifying the issue as taxpayer-funded lobbying strikes me as a bit of an overstatement. The issue derives from a struggle for local control. If taxpayer-funded lobbying is prohibited, how do local jurisdictions have a fair footing on proposed legislation with advocacy groups that are not subject to those limitations? So the question is, do you support local control? If so, how are you supporting local control? And that's for either of you who want to jump in on that one.
Sure. I mean, let me jump in. I mean, one of mine is I take everybody's phone call from local elected officials. They text me, they call me. I spend 10, 15 hours in the car a week driving back and forth and around. And I spend almost never listening to music anymore. And it's talking to, the elected officials because they're the ones that are in touch with them. I think that that's too much of where we've gone in the last 10 years is using that as a crutch. Well, I don't have to talk to my elected officials on both sides, and I'll just let the lobbyists do my work for me. In there, I guarantee I weigh my school board superintendent, who was sitting in here in my office right before this call, immensely greater than I do, an advocate that's coming in for the guys who come in want to talk about hemp funding or whatever else the case they are, in tax breaks or those. And so, it's that balancing act, and then it's holding each other accountable. Because we have that same constituency. They have the advantage. They're back home while I'm in Austin. They get to tell them that, I tried to call Representative Senator Springer, and he won't return my calls or won't answer my deals. Well, that's what's going to get us in trouble if we don't listen to them.
Angela, do you want to jump in on that one too?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that, really the thing that matters here is finding the balance of transparency. I honestly don't know anyone who takes this to say that the municipalities, the cities, counties, et cetera, shouldn't have government affairs people that they hire on themselves. People that are really focused on communicating with their elected officials. So I do want to make sure that no one misunderstands that. That's not part of what we're talking about here. But it matters to me. And again, I think you said that well, freshman Senator Springer, that really, we all have the same constituency. And the more we can communicate directly with each other, the better.
Take it easy on the freshmen. Don't go hazing them or anything like that, Angela, because we're fans of Drew.
I love Drew too, but part of that makes it more fun to haze him.
Right, exactly.
I still have freshman hazing PTSD, right? So my second session, so that's part of it for me.
Hey, we know you guys are busy. Both of you are joining us from the Capitol, so we really appreciate your time and your insights providing that. Thank you guys very much. And so now we're going to let you guys get back to work on the Senate side, and we're going to go down the hall on the other side of the rotunda and talk to some of our colleagues over on the House side. Senator Springer, thank you. Senator Paxton, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason.
Guys.
Good to see everyone. Bye-bye.
I see some of our representatives joining us right now, so we'll start introducing them. We have, I think, 4 or 5 of them. I think one of them might be a tad behind. Representative Justin Holland is still in the hearing. He may be able to join us late, but as these start coming on the call here, we'll introduce them here. Here's Candy Noble, representative. I see Representative Jeff Leach, Chairman Jeff Leach on the call as well. I thought I saw Scott Sanford a few moments ago. And Matt Shaheen, there's Representative Sanford and Matt Shaheen. Not sure if I saw him yet, but we'll keep an eye out for him. As the rest of them are joining, let me introduce our folks here. If you don't know everyone who represents Collin County, State Rep Jeff Leach, he's in his 5th term representing the citizens of House District number 67. And this session, Speaker Dade Phelan appointed Representative Leach to serve a 2nd term as chairman of the House Committee on the Judiciary and Civil Jurisprudence. Chairman Leach was selected to serve on the House Committee on Juvenile Justice and Family Issues as well. State Rep Scott Sanford with us as well. He served the districts of citizens of District 70 since 2013, representing much of Northeast Collin County. Representative Sanford was selected to serve on the Ways and Means, Public Education, and House Administration Committees for the 87th legislative session. Previously, he served on the Health and Human Services, Urban Affairs, Juvenile Justice, and Family Issues Committees, among others. I don't see Matt on the call here. Let's go over to State Rep Candy Noble. She was first elected to House District number 89 in 2018. She's in her 2nd term right now in the Texas House of Representatives. Her committee assignments for the 87th session include the House committees on Human Services, Ways and Means, and resolution calendars as well. Noble also serves as the Republican Caucus Secretary and serves on the board of Texas Conservative Coalition as well. Thank you guys so much. I know there are hearings going on, there's stuff happening down there. So the fact that y'all are able to get away for us here in Collin County, we greatly appreciate. We have a handful of questions, and just a quick note to our audience as well too. If you have questions as we continue the conversation here, drop those in the Q&A box there on the screen. And after we go through these questions, we will certainly get to those. Let's start with priorities. 68 days left in the legislative session. Hard to believe that the time is flying that much, but the whole session has been upended by everything that's been going on. Let's talk about top legislative priorities and where those stand. And Chairman Leach, we will start with you, sir.
Well, Jason, good to be with you. Hope everyone's doing well. You can hear me okay, right, bud?
Yes, sir. We got you.
Well, great to be with you. I wish we were together in person. Several of you are texting me right now, telling me my tie's not straight. And Frederick Frazier just told me that I needed to tell a joke to break the ice. Jason, I'm not sure what you're drinking there, but I'm willing to bet it's not water.
Well, what is Freddie Frazier saying? There's a lot of ice here. I mean, what's going on? Huh?
I don't know. I don't know, but it's great to be with you. And again, wish we were together in person. Look forward to being together soon. If you are around the Capitol, I know our entire legislative delegation would welcome you to our offices and welcome you here to the Texas House. You know, you told the Texas senators to get back to work, but they don't really ever work this late in the day. And so, you know, we just wrapped up a committee hearing in the House Judiciary Committee, passed out several bills, heard several new pieces of legislation. We're getting to the point in session with 68 days left, Jason, as you mentioned, where really stuff's starting to hit the floor, come through committee. The priorities of the session are very clear for all of us, although the devil may be in the details. Just getting our state back on track, getting our state open in a safe and secure way, recovering from COVID, looking to the future, of course, dealing with the winter storm and the crisis, the challenges, I should say, that we've been facing this year. Getting government out of the way and trusting the people to lead our state forward. It's about the people, not the politicians. And the people on this call know that very well. So I'm expectant we're going to deliver on your behalf this session. So appreciate working with our legislative delegation, Scott and Candy. I see you on, and Matt and Justin, I know are on their way. And then our senators. We're going to have a great session focused on the priorities that matter to the people of Texas, and look forward to our time together today.
Representative Noble, what are some of the priorities that you really have on the front burner?
Well, of course, we are bound to balance a budget, to do a budget. And that's something that's very important to all of us. And we heard from the comptroller this morning, you know, he's the weatherman for the state. He's got to stick his finger in the air and figure out which way the wind is blowing and how much money we will have to spend the next 2 years. And I don't envy him that job, because this has been just a crazy time financially for the state. We have, so that's working down here. And then I'm not on appropriations. So I'm glad I'm not having to work on that, but I am on Ways and Means, and we are dealing with the money issues in there, along with Representative Sanford. He's definitely the brains in the crowd there. I will say that I have a lot of work that's going on personally in human services, as well as Ways and Means, because that's where that is the Pac-Man that is quickly eating the budget of the state. It's going to eclipse the money we spend on education very quickly, because of the medical costs that are involved in Medicaid and the children that are in CPS and those kind of costs. So that is something that's really important to me, that we get it right. I'm carrying several bills actually that deal with our CPS system and our safety net systems that we have in the state, to just make sure that we're doing the best job we can, that we have the least amount of red tape, the least amount of administrative costs, so that the neediest Texans get the help they need, and that we do it in a way that honors the taxpayers.
All right, Representative Sanford.
Thank you, Jason. Great to be with everybody today. I appreciate y'all hosting this venue, and it's good to connect. Would say, first of all, learning lessons from the pandemic and implementing changes based upon those lessons learned. We could look to public education and broadband and attendance. There's so much to be learned there. One that I'm really focusing on, something I've been working on since last summer, is the constitutional rights of our elderly who might find themselves in assisted living facilities or memory care facilities, and in being put into a lockdown type of mode where they are no longer able to interact with their loved ones, and that leading to a decline in their mental health, and then their physical health follows their mental health, even to the point perhaps of death. And so making sure that if, God forbid, something like this ever happens again, that they'll always be able to have that essential caregiver, that family member, that loved one who could have access to love on that person who might find themselves in a facility. I think other priorities would be related to liability concerns, liability to businesses who've been open during the pandemic, and just all the illegal exposure there. We also find that our trucking industry is under attack through frivolous lawsuits, all to the point where we're about to lose insurance carriers, and we're about to lose trucking companies. And I know for a fact that trucks have been pulled off the road because of those concerns. So lessons that we need, that we have had the opportunity to learn, that we should learn from and move forward with and implement some new policies going forward. And I will just say there's a lot going on in criminal justice reform as well.
And Representative Sanford, you mentioned lessons learned from the pandemic. Let's use that to kind of pivot into our next topic here too. And one of the lessons learned from the pandemic was the dire need for stable broadband access for all Texans. Chairman Leach, where are you on that? What's in the pipeline? What do you think might actually pass if there's another pandemic that spins up on us?
It's a huge problem, and the legislature is going to be aggressive in addressing it. House Bill 5 by Representative Trent Ashby, who's our classmate. Scott and I came in with Trent, know him well, and work closely with him. He's got a great bill addressing broadband. It's one of the governor's emergency items. I'm very confident that we're going to do something meaningful and substantive in terms of getting broadband access to corners of the state that may not have reliable broadband. And importantly, as all of us know, it's not just about rural areas. This includes urban areas and suburban areas like ours. During the pandemic, specifically last spring and early fall, when so many of our kids, all of our kids, because schools were closed, were learning virtually, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of kids in our own districts who do not have reliable broadband at home and had to go sit in parking lots outside of schools or Starbucks or McDonald's to find wireless internet hotspots, just to participate in their class, to do their homework, to stay up to date. And it's our obligation, and I think our unique opportunity this session to learn from that, to realize what the problem is and to address it in a real bold way. And I'm confident that we're not only going to put the right framework in place, but put all the necessary funding in place as well to address the problem once and for all.
Representative Noble, we asked our senators about this a few moments ago, and one of our attendees had an interesting point, asking that, if private business doesn't want to, make the investment to the far reaches of the county or the district or wherever, would you support letting municipalities make that investment and take control of that?
This has been a hot topic out I live in Lucas. We actually had a bond election on November 4th that failed about this topic. Those that live in Plano and Allen and Frisco and McKinney probably don't realize that there's actually parts of our county in my area that still have dial-up. Y'all remember that?
Wow.
You got mail? It's hard to believe. And that's the kind of infrastructure we're talking about, that some people are still dealing with that or satellite links. So it actually is very expensive for a private provider to run lines to a single home. It's tens of thousands of dollars, actually. It's probably, I think it's around $10,000 to run fiber to a single home. So you have to have a lot of homes really close together to make that worth it, right? And when you live in Lucas or Fairview or Parker or further out, your homes are just pretty far apart. So it's probably never going to be an investment that a private provider is going to ever get a return on. So we're going to have to think outside the box. There's options that are coming, right? The satellite link ones that are looking more and more promising, and others, but we're just not there yet. So I think it's really incumbent on us to look at ways that we can maybe do public and private partnerships to make sure that we get that infrastructure in place and maybe let industry run it once we get it in place. But I think that we're going to have to do that in order to get broadband. I mean, people are needing to work from home, right? And we're finding that less and less medical providers want to be in rural areas. That's another way for us to have medical access for people that are more isolated. So it's more than just work and school. It's something that we've come to depend on and need, and actually it helps our economy in the long run.
Yeah, indeed. So it's a good point. Representative Sanford, but does something substantive actually get done on this, do you think?
I think it can. There are a couple of ideas that are floating out there. One is to allow small municipalities to engage in that type of activity. We just want to be careful that we see many times where government gets involved, becomes a monopoly, and then falls behind technologically And then down the road, the citizens aren't able to get the best of what's available. So, but with a little flexibility, a little ingenuity, creative thinking, such as Representative Noble mentioned, something could be done there perhaps. The other thing is perhaps we move into a situation where, like we did with the water situation several years ago, the state could create a fund allowing cities to expand their broadband capabilities by borrowing and leveraging a state fund, much as we do with the water plan. So those are some of the few of the many ideas that are floating out around the legislature right now.
Let's shift off to healthcare for a moment here. Expanding Medicaid. If the legislature finally did that, the governor signed that, then that would provide health insurance to what, about 1 million more Texans. How do you feel about that? And do you think that after a dozen other Republican-led states have done that, do you think it's finally time for Texas to do that? Chairman Leach?
Well, I think it's definitely time for Texas to do something. The rate of underinsured and uninsured Texans is unacceptable. We're gonna default to free market, free enterprise principles that actually expand access to reliable healthcare, affordable healthcare, sustainable funding mechanisms. One of the big concerns I've had for a long time with expanding Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, under current federal law, with all these federal strings attached, is whether it's sustainable for the state of Texas, whether it actually works for the state of Texas. I would much prefer to have the flexibility we need to meet the needs of the 28 million Texans who are here now, and then the 20 million more Texans who are on the way over the next 30 years. I'm not sure under the Affordable Care Act, the expansion of Medicaid under existing law works. I think we can come up with something better. I have yet to see a plan that I could support, but every plan that's presented to me, I look at with an open mind and an open heart, and believe that we need to do something. The question is just what it is, and I haven't yet seen a plan that I can support.
Representative Noble, what is it?
Well, thank you for asking this question. This actually came up on my Dallas Morning News interview back before the election. My opponent was very much in favor of expanding Medicaid. The truth is that we have our most vulnerable Texans on Medicaid right now. We have our CPS children. We have our adults with that literally cannot feed themselves, our IDD adult population, and our poorest Texans that are on Medicaid. And the truth is they can't find providers. Having Medicaid does not guarantee you health care. So let's change the topic from Medicaid to health care and access to health care, because that's really what we're talking about. What Texans want is something that they can afford, something that is accessible, and actually something that they have some control over individually. And that's not the answer that Medicaid gives us most of the time. So we need to, I have a daughter and son-in-law who chose. They could have gotten health insurance through my son-in-law's employer, but they chose to go on a medical sharing plan. And they walk into the doctor and they say, they actually have had 2 sets of twins while they've been on this plan. Wow. They say, I'm paying cash today. What's that price going to be? And I tell you that there's not been a single time that it hasn't been less than their copay would have been had they been on traditional insurance.
Two sets of twins? Is that what you said?
2 sets of twins, yes.
My goodness.
And other surgeries and stuff. So there are options out there. If we just look for it, that is one that they're considered uninsured Texans, but they certainly have their coverage through their medical sharing costs. So there are free market ideas out there and experiences out there that, you know what, government doesn't do as well as friends sharing those costs. And so I'm open to options outside of Medicaid expansion.
Representative Sanford, there have been a dozen states to expand Medicaid that are led by Republican governors and legislatures. What are they seeing that you guys don't like?
I think they're throwing in the towel. If you were to talk to those people who are pushing Medicaid expansion and just simply ask them, are you okay? Would you like to be on Medicaid? The answer would be absolutely not. The answer is, as Representative Noble mentioned, there are ways to get to affordability accessibility and patient control. And that's what the Republican caucus will be proposing during this legislative session. It will involve market mechanisms. It will involve transparency, which is a big lift to get just simple price information to patients for drugs and hospital costs and doctor costs. The accessibility part is huge because we have a lack of physicians across the state, especially those that will accept Medicaid. So we would be throwing making a bad situation worse because of lack of physicians that accept Medicaid if we were to go forward with something like that. But if we were to throw advanced practice registered nurses as accessible options for the population and other medical providers, we can make a big dent in the affordability and the accessibility.
Let's shift gears on a completely different topic here. One of the shared legislative priorities for many of the Collin County chambers is their opposition to taxpayer-funded lobbyists. I'm curious where you guys stand on this, and will that legislation get passed this time? Chairman Leach.
Oh, great question. Great issue for us to talk about. I'll try to keep my answer real short and to the point. For my elected officials that are on the call that I work with, so any school board members from Plano and Allen, or city council members from Plano, Allen, Richardson, or Dallas, or any of our county commissioners, you do not need to hire a lobbyist to communicate with me. You have my cell phone number. We talk regularly. I know what issues are important to you because you tell me. I implore you not to have a lobbyist call me on behalf of our citizens. There's no need to do that. And I would suggest that in parts of the state where political subdivisions feel like they need to hire a lobbyist using taxpayer dollars to communicate with their legislators, that's a problem that we shouldn't be willing to accept. Does that mean that cities shouldn't be able to advocate for positions? No. Does that mean that cities shouldn't be, or political subdivisions shouldn't be able to have government affairs employees? Not at all. That's not what we're suggesting. I am for the bill simply because I believe it's imperative for us to have direct lines of communication with our elected officials at all levels without having to go through lobbyists to do so.
Chairman Leach, one of the points made earlier in the discussion with senators is that there might be school districts, cities, whatever, that might feel outgunned by advocacy organizations with high-powered lobbyists. What would you say to them?
I just look, I can only speak for me and my vote and my relationship with my elected officials, but there's no lobbyist in this town or organization in this town that holds sway over me, over my constituents, over my elected officials back home. Doesn't mean we're going to agree on every issue, but the reason you hire a lobbyist is to advocate for an issue. Right. And you don't need to hire a lobbyist to advocate on behalf of your citizens, whether it's a mayor or a city council member or a county commissioner or a school board member. Jason, I'm going to be honest with you. If a school board trustee or a city council member had a paid lobbyist that called me on their behalf, I would have to tell that lobbyist, I wouldn't hang up the phone on them because I'm not rude, but I would proverbially hang up the phone on them and say, why isn't the elected official calling me? And that's what I would hope would be true for every state representative and every state senator across the state of Texas.
You guys may have just seen, we have State Rep Matt Shaheen joining us now. Matt, it's good to see you again.
Hey, I apologize. I was laying a bill out, so I apologize for being late.
No, we appreciate the time here too. I'll give you a second to get your feet wet and hear the question as well as we go to State Rep Scott Sanford here. Same question for you, Scott, and Matt. I'll repeat the question to you here too. One of the shared legislative priorities for so many of the chambers in Collin County is their opposition to taxpayer-funded lobbying. Where do you stand on that, Scott?
I agree with Representative Leach. I really don't think I could say it any better than he said it. The relationship in Collin County, I think, between all elected officials is pretty open, pretty strong, and there's just not a need to interact through a third party. And I think for that system to foster, to have that intermediary, is unhealthy for the citizens at the end of the day.
Representative Noble.
So I think that some people are looking at this bill as if it were the bill that we heard 2 years ago. It's actually quite a bit different. This one literally says If you're an elected official and you use taxpayer resources to come talk to us, that's still allowed. If you're an elected official and you band together with other elected officials to have somebody looking at bills and kind of giving you a heads up on what's going on, that's still allowed. It literally says you can hire one of those lobbyists that's listed as a registered lobbyist with taxpayer money. You could literally use your own money to do that. It's kind of interesting to know that the city of Austin, who has more access to us than the citizens of Austin, hire 8 lobbyists with their tax dollars. It's just outrageous. And so, of course, they're the worst example, but there is nothing that would prohibit well-meaning citizens from having somebody looking at bills. I realize that we do an awful lot down here so quickly that you need somebody to be looking at those bills for consequences, unintended, and things that you really love. And that is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about literally having a registered lobbyist come speak on your behalf. And I agree with Chairman Leach and Chairman Sanford that is absolutely unnecessary in my life. Please, please, please reach out to me personally.
And Representative Shaheen, we want to get you in here as well too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have a little bit of a unique perspective. I used to be locally elected. I was a county commissioner, and Representative Sanford and Leach were both in the legislature the session before I started. So I never even thought of having a lobbyist interact between the three of us. I'd text them, I'd give them a call. I had complete access. So no way would I even think about my county commissioner days, would we hire a lobbyist to lobby our legislature. And I think, quite frankly, it puts everyday citizens at a disadvantage, right? Because you have a lobbyist, that's their job. They're here in the Capitol all 140 days, where our constituents, they're working, raising their families. So it's really an unfair advantage. And we're not to do anything to stop the communication with our friends, the ISDs, our cities, our counties, our community colleges. I mean, that's very important. We're not going to do anything to harm that. I think the comments made earlier about they're going to be able to hire people to research bills, all those types of things, but it's going to be really a fairness issue as far as the constituents that we serve.
Matt, we'll stick with you for this next question as well, since you joined us a few minutes late here too. And this is about public schools, kind of the same vein in the sense that it's a public entity here too. But we watched as public schools and districts had to quickly pivot last spring, last fall. They're still doing things differently now because of the pandemic. What legislation out there do you like that directly helps districts and helps public education after all the heroism that we saw over the past 12 months?
Yeah, hats off to our principals, our teachers. Gosh, especially the early part of the pandemic, we were talking to our superintendents and our teachers and principals. What a great job that they did, just stepping up during a very difficult situation, educating our children, during a pandemic, going virtually, overnight almost. The thing that I'm probably most concerned about is there's now a gap that we recognize where our children are from an education perspective and where they need because of the virtual learning. The reality is a lot of our children are behind right now. And so we got to intervene. We got to help our children catch up. We got to close that gap. And there's disparity as far as demographics and the like. So, one of the pieces of legislation that we're looking at, I happened to meet with the public education chairman yesterday about that, is to make sure that we get the funding dollars. And a lot of it's actually going to be federal funding to get it to our schools so that they can help close that gap. There's going to be a lot of different approaches, but closing the gap, it takes our students so long. During one of the hurricanes, there was maybe a week or two that students missed out of school. And we have thousands that we can't even identify where they are right now. So closing that gap is going to be really important, and legislation to help that is going to be key.
Representative Sanford, same question for you. Public education, what do you like right now?
I'll say that first of all, as Matt said, hats off to principals and the teachers and the administration in Collin County. The education system really did everything that they could for each and every kid to keep them up to speed. I've seen just, as you mentioned, Jason, I think you said heroic earlier, just heroic efforts. I will say this, my wife and I mentor a couple of kiddos in McKinney School District, and we've been mentoring them via Zoom this year. And that's been quite difficult. The kids are not going to campus physically, and we're learning that they're probably going to have to repeat their grade next year because that gap has been created because they've not been on campus. Their learning has not kept up, and they're probably going to have to repeat their grade. And I think that's a travesty. And the truth of the matter is that schools, because of the hard work of our schools, are one of the safest, probably the safest place to be during the pandemic. Did you know that of all the school personnel and students across the state, only 0.0235% contracted COVID? And that's because of their great work. And so I wish that, I think history is going to judge us harshly for all of these kids that have not been on campus, particularly this past semester. But early on, it made sense. But we will have a lot of work ahead of us, but we've got the team to do it.
Representative Noble, what are the lessons learned out there that you'd like to make permanent?
Well, most of y'all probably know I have a background in education, but I'm also the mom of a current Plano high school teacher. And it's been a crazy, crazy year since this started a year ago now, right? First teaching online, then teaching in classroom and online. I can't believe what teachers have had to go through and the number of kids that have literally fallen through the cracks in the meanwhile. I'm very concerned for gaps in education that are going to be a result of this year. And, if your kid was taking geometry this year and they plan to be an architect, I hope they got enough of it. I mean, that's the heartbreaking truth. So I'd really love to see us do something about testing, map testing, maybe where I love map testing. It shows you progress of an individual student. I think that is so much more valuable right now than a blanket star testing type of a situation. And that's the kind of changes. Otherwise, let's just get out of the way and let our schools get back to doing what they do best, and that's educating our kids. We did a heavy lift last time by changing the way we finance our schools, and I'm so glad that is a priority in our budget this year. And the truth is we're doing some little tweaks on that, but we don't have a lot of heavy lifts this time on education finance, at least.
Chairman Leach, I've heard your colleagues talk about closing the gap. I've heard a lot of parents talk about closing the gap and superintendents as well. Is there a legislative fix to closing the gap though?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got to base our education priorities off what we're hearing from our superintendents and our principals, our educators, our parents, and the kids themselves. I've got 3 kids in public schools, and right now they're doing benchmark STAR testing. I can't tell you how disappointed and angered we all are at the fact that we're doing STAR this spring. There's no, in my personal opinion, although I think it's an informed opinion, there's no reason we should be doing it. We should be trusting our educators to do tests like MAP and COGAT and tests that give us real-time results. So many of our school districts are already doing these things, but these state mandates in so many instances are just not necessary and not helpful. Yes, we need assessment, we need accountability, we need data. No one would argue against that. But here in this building in the Capitol, we're based on the feedback we're getting from our educators and our parents. Like I said, STAR testing, the continuation of funding. We achieved a great victory for the continuation of the hold harmless provisions to make sure that our school districts are protected for the rest of this year. That's not anything we necessarily did, although we worked directly with our superintendents to achieve that goal. But funding, teacher healthcare, making sure that healthcare for our educators is affordable. I'll say this in closing: we are not going to retreat from the victories that we all achieved on HB3. We worked way too hard on that transformative, monumental piece of legislation last session. There was some talk maybe a year or so ago when the pandemic started that, well, we're going to be facing a big budget shortfall. Maybe the legislature is going to retreat from that. We're not. We're doubling down on it. And that's what we need to do to close the gap, not just for our school districts, but for all school districts across the state.
Let's go to questions from our attendees. The first is from Tracy Douglas here. This has been waiting for a few moments about broadband. Tracy asks, how is the state working with providers and city governments for providing at least broadband to rural Texas towns? Additionally, what is the plan for updating the outdated infrastructure to allow broadband connections? Candy, do you want to take that one? Okay, you don't have to.
Well, that's fine. We just
Whoever wants to
a
hop
lot
in.
of moving parts on that question, and you know what's happening out in Mineola may be different than what's happening in Lucas, and so I kind of have a smaller actually, I had one of our rural co-ops reach out and want me to connect them up with our cities. So there's a lot of options out there with lines that they already have run through our cities that they would love to be able to provide through those lines. There's options out there that where we could do a public-private partnership and do it much faster than if government tries to take it over and do it in perpetuity. I'm sorry that didn't work out in Lucas because it was something that we talked about a lot. I mean, that was a hornet's nest in Lucas, whether or not the city should have its own broadband service provider and the city run it, and it failed. So it's not, there's no one size fits all.
Right.
Each city, each area is different, and I like that people are coming up with some options here. And you know what? There are a lot of people at the state level, at the governor's level, that are looking at this and coming up with options.
If anyone else wants to hop in on that question, we have a few others I'll get to in our last 10, 15 minutes here. There's another question about virtual learning. And the question is, what are your thoughts on preparing for more virtual learning in the future? How do you prepare to create a better model for virtual education that will yield more positive results so students do not fall down in the future? The question goes on to say, we had 10 years to prepare for a better grid to prevent outages. These things are popping up. People are adding questions. So do you think it's safe to say we could experience a need for virtual learning in the future? It seems we need to review the lessons learned, but also prepare for future pandemics as well. Anybody can hop in on that one. It's a wide open question for the floor.
I'll start. Wiley has already made the decision. I have 5 school districts. Wiley's already made the decision for next year that they are not going to do virtual, that they're going 100% in person. That is where they see the best success for their students. I think that's the only school district that I represent that has made that decision. It is something that I think that each school district, each superintendent and their school board need to decide what's best for their students going forward, and how they implement that.
Yeah, if for the rest of the panel here too, Matt, Scott, or Jeff, is there a need to lock in the lessons learned from the virtual learning experience that we had?
Yeah, I mean, the state has a virtual learning network that's actually been used for many years. I think Candy hit it right, though. I think what we need to do is, this is very much a local control issue. I think the different ISD, remember, Texas is a very diverse state, very rural, very urban, suburban areas. So really those local ISDs should be driving those decisions. But a lot of things that I've heard is that some of the lessons learned is there's some students and some topics that they really excel virtually, but a lot of topics, a lot of students not. So a lot of those decisions need to be made locally, but I think there are some accommodations that we need to make long-term for virtual, for different segments of education.
Scott or Jeff, do you have any thoughts on lessons learned from virtual?
I'll just say that virtual just needs to be a very applicable, up-to-date, and viable option for those who could excel with that type of learning in the course that we mentioned earlier. But there are those who will not excel in a virtual environment, and they need to be on campus. So keeping the kid forefront in our minds first. As we look at policy, and I think that the best policy probably is a local control, and let them develop the best programs for their kids going forward.
Yeah, I'll just add, my first experience with virtual learning was like many parents this year. The first day of this school year in the fall, my youngest son Landry, who was 5 at the time. It was his first day of kindergarten, and I'm sitting in my home office doing some work. I think I was on a Zoom call, and our kids were across the way in the dining room table getting on their Zoom calls, first day of school. And our son Landry was with his kindergarten class, and within 30 minutes of the class starting, our son was taking his shirt off in the class. And you know, just we all have crazy stories of stuff that we learned, we saw. Talk to our judges who've been doing virtual trials and depositions and hearings, and listen to some of the stuff that they've seen. It's been a great learning experience. I don't think we should retreat from technology or retreat from virtual learning. We should take what we've learned and make it available as a tool to Representative Sanford's point, to kids and students who can benefit from it. One population that cannot benefit from virtual learning is our special ed and special needs population. And we saw that firsthand. We work closely with our superintendents to try to figure out ways to serve them in person. You cannot put even a highly functional autistic student in front of a camera and expect them to function properly for 8 hours a day. You just can't do it. And so whether it's our special needs populations or all students, we've got to have some serious conversations about how best to serve all of the 5.7 million students in our public schools across the state.
The next question is talks about food insecurity and the struggle that so many nonprofits and our food banks have been working on for the past 12 months. Is there a state role at all in you know, stepping in here and assisting this at all, and making sure the right people are getting the food, making sure that everyone who needs it is getting the food?
Well, there are some programs that the state administers. There's temporary assistance to needy families. There's SNAP, there's WIC, Women and Infant Children. So there are some programs, but you know, I got to tell you, especially just a month ago when we had those outages, and like a lot of our churches, a lot of our religious institutions, the Salvation Army really stepped in and fed people that were driven from their homes. And there's the North Texas Food Bank, Minnie's Food Pantry. I think probably a lot of the people that are watching this will recognize those institutions. They really do such a good job as far as food insecurity. So there's things that the state, coupled with the federal government, does, but I'll tell you the biggest impact is in our local community. They do such a wonderful job with that topic.
Anybody else want to hop on this one? I have a few more here as well too. And the first is new leadership in the House. People in North Texas might not know State Rep Dade Phelan from over in the Beaumont area. What's different? What's the feel like this session with a new leader in the House? Is that any more challenging to get stuff done? Is it easier to get things done? What's it like?
Well, it's been interesting.
Nobody wants to talk about the speaker here, right? No one wants to say a word.
I will. So far, it seems that he is really letting the members run the House, and it's really nice. At times, it leaves you looking for, okay, where's the leadership? And but allowing the members to do the work is great. One of the things we heard him say last night in a speech was that in the area of criminal justice, we need to stop approaching it by punishing those that we're mad at and punishing those that we're scared of. And so criminal justice reform, I think it really will have some momentum because of that type of attitude from the Speaker's office. For instance, I've got a bill that would help end the poverty to prison cycle by, when somebody gets out of prison, eliminating some fees and fines when they get out of prison because they've done their time. So now they can go get their driver's license and go get a job and not have that huge debt hanging over their heads. I say that because under Speaker Phelan, I expect, and his leadership, I'd expect bills like that to advance forward, and rehabilitation efforts to advance throughout the state.
He seems, just having talked to him several times, he seems widely respected by both sides in the House as well too. And Candy, do you want to hop in there? Did you unmute your mic? Or gotcha. I may have seen Scott put his back on. Another issue out there too is about the winter storm failure, and a lot of talk that there may not be enough time left in the legislative session, 68 days left here, to get something meaningful done on the energy crisis that we faced last month. Is that going to a special session? What do you think about this? Is a PUC going to be, rather than appointed, is that going to be an elected position? Those 2 or 3 positions be elected? What's likely here? Chairman Leach?
Okay.
Or Matt, go ahead. If you,
well,
you want to hop in, let him collect his thoughts for a second. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, yeah, just because I'm on state affairs, so we've
Yeah.
been dealing with that topic. So we actually voted a significant number of bills out last week to address the outage that we have. You know, secure grid is obviously very important. So there's some legislation that was voted out that adjusts the makeup of ERCOT and their board. And then with the PUC, I think probably a lot of people are aware of the chair and members have actually resigned. So there'll be replacements to that. I think the big thing, the real important piece of legislation that we have is, you know, we had 26 hours of hearings to find out what exactly happened. And we've taken those lessons learned into statute and we voted those out. So for example, our power generation companies, they're required to have what's called an emergency operation plan, right? It's kind of a disaster recovery plan where they're supposed to anticipate these extreme either weather events, you know, hurricanes, earthquakes, those types of things. So we're actually going to looking at legislation to actually mandate those, and not only mandate these emergency operation plans, but also simulate them and test them. So some of the things that happen that cause some of the power loss, in addition to just the weather, won't happen again, that you can test for those and be much better prepared. So those have been voted out. I actually have a lot of confidence that that can happen during the regular session.
And does that include like winterizing as well too?
Yeah, so there's a couple different bills with respect to winterizing, requiring those. But, you know, quite frankly, a lot of that can be done through rulemaking as well. So we want to preserve the power of the Public Utility Commission as far as their rulemaking ability. What some of the feedback that we got is some of that was unclear. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a combination of just making it very clear what the authority of the PUC is, and then what action needs to be taken by the state legislature. But winterization is definitely part of that.
Chairman Leach.
Well, Representative Shaheen put it really well. I mean, my strong opinion is that it was certainly an unprecedented storm. It was a Category 5 hurricane that hit all of Texas, 254 counties. We should have been better prepared. It shouldn't have happened. It was a massive failure of so many different agencies and entities, and the buck stops with us as the legislature. So going back to your previous session about Speaker Phelan, I think he's doing an awesome job. He's uniquely positioned our Collin County legislative delegation to have a really meaningful, substantive impact on not only the state, but our area specifically: education, infrastructure, transportation, the grid. You know, all these issues where we have a voice, and we're going to lead on this issue specifically. You gauge how successful the House is going to be. We'll see in 67 days. If we fail to do something to secure our grid, to make it more reliable, to ensure and provide confidence to the people of Texas that this is never going to happen again, then you're going to grade our paper, and you're not going to grade it well. We know what we have to do to make this legislative session a success, and I'm very confident that under the Speaker's leadership, we're going to do so. And that includes all of the issues you just talked about with respect to securing the grid and making sure that crisis never happens again.
Just a couple of minutes left here. Representative Sanford, does that go to a special session, or do you think it can be done in the regular session?
Because of the early start that the State Affairs Committee had on this, I believe it's possible that it could be done during the regular session. But I'll make no mistake that I believe that the governor would not hesitate to call a special session, nor would we oppose one if there's remaining work to be done. Or for other lessons learned that need to be implemented in statute.
All right, Representative Noble, you get the final word on this if you want it.
Well, I just want to give, and I know my other Collin County delegation will agree. Thank you so much to Matt Shaheen for all of his hours and hours and hours of testimony he sat through about what happened during that storm, and we're grateful for the ideas that they've come up with. I heard that we're going to probably be hearing those bills very soon, that they've already been, as he said, voted out and sent to calendars. So I think that we will be dealing with that soon. Now, what we won't be dealing with soon is redistricting, because we're not going to be getting those numbers from the federal government for a good bit of time. In fact, we'll already be home before we get those numbers. So we will be looking forward to a special session, but I'm hopeful that it will not be about energy.
Good deal. Yeah, I understand what later in the fall, September, October is when those numbers might come from the census for redistricting to begin. So you guys will be back in Austin later this year, I'm sure. Hey, we appreciate, we don't want to hold you past the time, the commitment you made to us here. So thank you so much for stepping out and joining us this afternoon. We appreciate that. And, you know, it's really just a testament to the value in communicating with businesses, the fact that you guys were able to join us while you're there at the Capitol. So thank you guys very much. We appreciate that. And thanks to our audience as well, too, with the questions. Refreshing to see a lively conversation here, too. So with that, Sharon, I will toss it back to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much, Jason, for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time to be a part of this program and to help moderate such a great conversation. Your virtual presence, greatly appreciated. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Sharon Mayer, and I'm the CEO of the Allen Fairview Chamber of Commerce and a proud partner of the Collin County Legislative Days program. If you're interested in hearing more about or from Jason, you can find his work as the senior news reporter for WFAA and host of Inside Texas Politics, a weekly political television program that is broadcast statewide. You can catch his show on Sundays at 9 a.m. on Channel 8. If you're a podcast listener, as many of us are, Jason also hosts y'all, and I'm going to do this hopefully as well as Lisa did, Y'all-itics Political Podcast, found most anywhere you access podcasts. Be sure to follow him on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Jason Whiteley. Maybe we can all learn his secret to waking up without coffee. So those of you who were not on the first part of this presentation may not understand that, but he seems to manage quite well. Anyway, thank you again, Jason. We look forward to seeing you soon. But before we end today's program, I want to again say thank you to our sponsors, Core Construction, Fairview Eye Care, McKinney Economic Development Corporation, and the North Texas Commission. Your continued support helps us to bring these conversations to our members. And now it is my pleasure, even though we give him a hard time, to introduce Tony Felker, President and CEO of the Frisco Chamber of Commerce, with some closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sharon. We want to thank everybody, in particular our elected officials. I think it was said many times, it is about open communication, and that's one of the reasons that we've always done Collin County Days. This year it is a little bit different, but we appreciate that. And I love the very spirited discussion, as I think Jason put it, and agreement that we had on many of the issues, including HB3, ERCOT, broadband access, local control. There were a couple of issues where we might have a little bit different opinions. One of those in particular, I just wanted to clarify, the majority of the chambers in Collin County are opposed to the banning of taxpayers funded lobbyists. And I think Senator Paxton may have put some of it on there. There is a lot of confusion. I like her idea that it should be about transparency. Maybe using the term taxpayer funded lobbyist has a negative context to it. It should be about open communication, transparency, local control possibly, because there could be some issues that require history on a particular topic or cost to retain a municipal entity to retain governmental affairs people. So there are reasons that we're supporting the opposition to that, including North Texas Commission. We encourage open discussion by everybody to reach out to your chambers, your business officials, your elected officials, and learn more about this and have that ongoing dialogue that we appreciate so much. In closing, I just want to extend our deepest appreciation to our members, partners, employees, business owners, fellow chambers, and all of our elected officials for joining this year's Collin County Legislative Day. We understand the challenges that all of you are facing right now, and we're very grateful that you were able to join us today to learn from and engage with your elected officials. As we mentioned, although we were not able to gather in person this year, we appreciate all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be part of this program. Kelly said at the top of the call, chambers more than ever now are vital in our local communities, and in particular our business communities. We thank you for supporting us, your community, and for joining us today. We would be remiss if we did not thank all the volunteer leaders and staff from all of the great chambers here in Collin County for their leadership. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and adjourn everybody. I am willing to make a bet that your drive back from Austin to Frisco, for most of you, will be a lot shorter this year than it's been in other years. So we want to thank all of you. Have a great afternoon, and we are adjourned from Collin County Days 2021. Thanks, everybody.